Samson was a strong man who let himself be led astray by a Jezebel like Delilah. Samson slayed the Philistines with the axe of the apostles. Moses led the Hebrews to the Red Sea, where they made unleavened bread, which is bread made without any ingredients. The Egyptians were all drowned in the desert. Afterward, Moses went up on Mount Sinai to get the 10 Amendments. The first commandment was when Eve told Adam to eat the apple. The 5th commandment is humor thy father and mother. The 7th commandment is thou shalt not admit adultery. Moses died before he reached Canada. Then Joshua led the Hebrews in the Battle of Jericho. The greatest in the Bible is when Joshua told his son to stand still, and he obeyed him. David was a Hebrew king skilled at playing the lyre. He fought with the Finkelsteins. I'm sorry. He fought with the Finkelsteins, a race of people who lived in biblical times. Solomon, one of David's sons, had 300 wives and 700 porcupines. When Mary heard that she was the mother of Jesus, she sang the Magna Carta. When the 3 wise guys from the east arrived, they found Jesus in the manger. Jesus was born because Mary had an immaculate contraption. St. John the blacksmith dumped water on his head. Jesus enunciated the golden rule, which says to do one to others before they do one to you. He also explained, man does not live by sweat alone. It was a miracle when Jesus rose from the dead and managed to get the tombstone off the entrance. The people who followed the Lord were called the 12 decibels. The epistles were the wives of the apostles. One of the opossums was St. Matthew, who was by profession a taxi man. St. Paul converted to Christianity. He preached holy acrimony, which is another name for marriage. Christians should have only one wife. This is called monotony. Well, we may know very little about the Bible, and unfortunately, many people know very little about the Bible. But we want to look at something of that intertestamental period. What happened in the meantime? What happened between Ezra and Nehemiah, which is basically the historic part even of Malachi. The stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, remember when they brought the reform, the Jews repented and prayed and began to study the Word. What happened between that time and the New Testament that you find in the days of Jesus? The Judaism in the days of Jesus was a far cry from the biblical Judaism or the Judaism of Nehemiah and Ezra. So what happened? Historically, there are at least 6 eras that you need to note. The first in that history is one we've already talked about quite a bit with Ezra and Nehemiah, the Babylonian and Persian era. And I would refer you simply to our lessons on Ezra and Esther to see that history. The Greek era then began with Alexander the Great conquered Persia, Babylonia, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, and western India. He died at the age of 33, having ruled the known world for only 13 years. But his influence lived long after him. Then came the Egyptian era. With the death of Alexander in 323 BC, the Greek Empire is divided among his 4 generals. Daniel chapter 8 tells us something about what happens. In fact, Daniel clearly tells us the order that is going to happen. He tells the Nebuchadnezzar that he is the great head of gold, remember in the great image that he had. Then he tells them that the Medes and the Persians are going to come along. After them, the Greeks, and after them, an empire like the huge great beast that he pictures, which we know now to be the Roman Empire, part of which is extending even to today. In that Egyptian era, when Alexander died, his empire is divided among his four great generals. The one that took the Egyptian part of it is the one who now controlled Palestine. Israel was caught in the middle. And Syrians come and defeat Egypt in battle. In 198, Judea was annexed to Syria. So you have then the Syrian era. And the major person under the Syrian rule is a man named Antiochus. He was actually Antiochus IV. He ruled so that terrible things happened during that period in Israel. Actually, the most important event that is still going on is the Hellenizing of the Jewish area, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Then you have in 165 the Maccabean area. An elderly priest named Mattathias of the house of Hasmon. Later you'll hear of the Hasmonean kings. They come from this one called Hasmon. And from that house, a man named Mattathias lived with 5 sons in a little village called Modem, northwest of Jerusalem. When a Syrian official tried to enforce heathen sacrifice in Modem, Mattathias revolted. He killed a renegade Jew who tried to offer the sacrifice. He slew the Syrian official and fled to the mountains with his family. Thousands of faithful Jews joined him there in the mountain, and history records one of the noble demonstrations of holy jealousy for the honor of God. After the death of Mattathias, 3 of his sons in the revolt took charge in succession. Judas was surnamed Maccabeus, and this is where we get the word Maccabee. We don't really know what the word Maccabee means. It probably meant hammer, as Judah was the hammer of God that was trying to release Israel. But Jonathan and Simon were his brothers. These men had such success that by December 25th, 165 BC, that's 160-some years before our Lord is born, they had retaken Jerusalem, cleansed the temple, and restored worship. When they cleansed the temple with throughout all the idols and everything else that is there, and did the sacrifice of purification, which necessitated, remember, the river and various sacrifices, they came to the menorah and tried to light the menorah. There was one single menorah, one major one there, and they had only enough oil for the menorah, the lampstand, to be lit for one day. Miraculously, the oil lasted for 8 days. And that's why we have the celebration called Hanukkah. It actually is the celebration of their independence and the cleansing of the temple at that time. That's why we have the eight candle-lighted menorahs that you see today. It's the 8 days that is symbolized there. From that fighting, they, under the leadership of Simon, they received their independence in 142 BC. And that lasted for about 60 years. They were independent. And then Rome came. The Roman era is from 63 to 4 BC. The independence of the Jews ended in 63 BC when Pompey took Syria and entered Israel. Aristobulus II, claiming to be king of Israel, locked Pompey out of Jerusalem. One of the things you see in history is that just as the Jews were constantly fighting each other, and this was one of their major problems, the Romans were doing the same thing. Many of the wars of this time is not Rome against Syria or Rome against Egypt or anything like that. It's Rome against Rome. It's generals wanting power, and this is the situation you have here.